Hi, and welcome to another video by Jim the Car Guy, and welcome to another ride along. Today it's a beautiful sunny day. As you can see, we're heading up to the shop, and we're going to talk about today is the cost to open a shop and to run a shop, a legitimate shop. I'm not talking about doing things where it's where you don't have your insurances in place and you don't have your corporation or your limited liability corporation set up or anything like that. This is all we're talking about now, is all legitimate above board type repair shops. There is a lot of repair shops out there that don't do things 100% correctly. I know a couple of them in particular in my area that do not have insurance. They're not registered. They run it strictly as an off-the-books type business, and it makes it very difficult for people like me who do everything above board to try to compete with somebody like that. Somebody like that opens up a shop. They have basic hand tools, and they don't care if they're doing the job correctly. They're going to do it as least expensive as possible to maximize as much money as they can. Are they ripping off the customers? Yeah, they probably are. They do using inferior parts and not doing it 100% right. Well, one day I had this guy pull into my shop. He pulls into the door and he says to me, can you take a look at my car? It's running a little bit rough, and can you take a look at it? So I said, yeah, no problem. So I'm talking to the guy as we're walking outside. I popped the hood up and he says to me, yeah, I had the car to a guy up the street and he did a tune-up to the car and he did a bunch of other things to it, and it's still running bad. What he did not correct the problem. So I said, you really don't want to pay me to fix somebody else's job that they did already. I said, if I were you, I would bring it back to him and let him take a look at it and see what he did wrong or what he didn't diagnose correctly. So the guy says to me, well, he says, I had it back already, and the guy gave me the runaround and all that. He says, can you just take a peek at it and see what you think? So I said, well, let me look under the hood. I'll see what it looks like without putting it on my scan tool or computer or anything like that to find out what's happening. I open up the hood and look, and I says to the guy, I said, you said you had this thing tuned up. I said, you have the receipt? Can I take a look at it? So he says, yeah. He gives me the receipt. I look at it. It was a very vague receipt. The receipt said tune-up. It didn't list any parts that were replaced or anything like that. But looking under the hood, I know that nothing has been changed. Maybe the spark plugs were changed. I couldn't see that, but nothing else was done. And I said, you really want to bring it back to the guy? I said, because for what he charged you, he should have done a complete tune-up on it, and I can see he probably just changed spark plugs, so you want to bring it back to him. And sure enough, what happened is, by looking at it a little bit closer, I could see on the spark plug wires there was actually a date, and they were still the original wires that were on there. So the point I'm making is that make sure that the shop you go into is a good, qualified, legitimate shop, not just somebody who pops up there for a couple of years doing everything real cheap and then they disappear. That's not the way to go. But today we're going to talk about what does it cost to open up a shop. And I'm just going to give you from experience, my experience on what I'm paying now just to have my shop up and running every day. As you know, to set up a corporation is not cheap. You have to do things on the up and up. You have to set up the corporation with a lawyer and an accounting firm and get it all set up correctly, which myself and the vast majority of people out there, they do this the right way. But to set up a shop, just off the bat, in my particular area now, I'm talking about in the Northeast. I don't know what it is elsewhere, but if you wanted to rent a shop in the Northeast where I'm located, just to rent a shop, you're looking at a bare bones minimum, bare bones. If you were lucky to find something for $5,000, you would be extremely lucky a month. If you own the shop, then of course you have your taxes and you have your mortgage that you're going to be paying on top of all of the other bills. So you have to factor in whether you're going to have a shop that you're going to buy the property and own the property, or if you're going to lease a property from somebody. Back in the early days when I did start, I did lease my shop. I didn't buy it outright at that point, not until later on in life did I. And at that point, I was able to get a 3-year lease with the guy, so I knew for at least the next 3 years I was going to be in that location. But you still have your monthly payments that you have to do. You have to pay your rent, and you have to pay your water bill, your heating bill. My heating bill in the winter time is probably anywhere, depending on how severe the winter is, you're probably looking at $300 or $400 a month just to heat the shop. And I'm not talking about heated up to where it's 75 or 80 degrees in there. I'm talking about where the shop is just, in the 60s, 60, 70 degrees like that, just where you can work without freezing. And of course, as you know, with the shop, as soon as you open up the doors, you open up the garage door, all that heat goes out of the building, and you have to reheat it again. So heating is a very expensive part. The water bill, the sewerage bill, that's all pretty expensive too. I believe I pay on the quarter probably around $200-300 a quarter for my my water and my sewerage. The other thing you have to think about too is your insurance. What kind of insurance do you want to have on it? Now, anybody who works for me, I never pay anybody off the books. Everybody was always paid on the books, because if you get hurt in this kind of a business, usually it's a serious injury. It's not just a minor little injury. I know a very good friend of mine who was in the business wound up, and this guy was in the business just as long as I was, and he made a mistake one day. He was distracted, not paying attention, and he wound up losing two of his fingers. One of them he was able to get reattached. The other one was lost. So the point I'm making is that you want to make sure you have insurance in place, because it can be usually a pretty catastrophic injury in this kind of a business, whether it's your eyes, your hands, your legs, or whatever it is. You want to make sure that any employees are covered. And again, this is just my personal opinion on things. I never hired anybody to work off the books for me. Everybody was always on the books. So you have to factor in the cost of workman's comp. And workman's comp is based on a percentage of whatever their salary is. I'll say, for argument's sake, the salary is $1,000 a week. Workman's comp is based on a percentage of what that salary is. And usually workman's comp is very expensive. It's not cheap. You're paying probably between $3 and $4 per 100 for workman's comp. So you can do the math. It's pretty expensive at the end of the month when you have to pay your workman's comp. The other thing you have to think about too, which is extremely expensive, is the liability on the building, and on the vehicles that are in your possession. Me, I actually carry a $2 million policy on the cars that are in my possession, and if I'm driving a car and I have an accident or something happens, I have $2 million worth of coverage on the vehicle as far as any damage to other vehicles or anything like that. And that is not too cheap either. The insurance policy for that, it's probably going to cost you, let me just think, I do it for the year. It's about $20,000 a year, so you'll have to do the math. You're paying over $1,000 a month, probably closer to like $1,300 a month just for the liability on the building and everything, which is, a very expensive thing. So all in all, to run a shop, now I'm not talking about the salaries you're paying your mechanics, you do have, the mechanics are going to be making anyway, depending on the location, again, and what competency level of mechanic you're going to have. You're probably not going to get a mechanic to work for less than $1,000 a week. Most likely, if you want somebody who's really good and competent and not going to cause you significant comebacks, it's going to cost you a lot more than that. So that's the other factor you have to think. The salaries, the workman's comp, the insurance on the building, the heating, the water, the sewerage, and then of course you have to take into consideration all of the licensing that comes every year. You'll have to pay licensing. You have to pay to the fire department, because the fire department, you have hazardous material in your building, and you have to pay a fee to the fire department every year for your hazardous waste. The other thing you'll need to know is you'll have to have fire extinguishers. Your fire extinguishers have to be updated every year, and you have to have a fire extinguisher within, I believe it's 10 feet of the work area. So in my shop, which is really not a big shop, I got 4 fire extinguishers in there, which is not really a big deal. But when you have to have the fire extinguishers serviced every year, you're looking at about $100 per fire extinguisher to be refilled or tested to make sure that they're okay. And that the fire department will come in every year and check it to make sure that you're current with it. And if you're not current, they shut you down. So you have to make sure you're current with that. You can't skate by and not do that. The other thing you have to think of too is the waste removal. How much is it going to cost you to get rid of the waste product that you generate? Now, you're probably saying, well, there's really not a lot of waste products that you generate, but there actually is. You do oil changes, you do oil transmission services, differential, antifreeze. All of that stuff has got to be stored, and it has to go to a company to be properly recycled. Unlike years ago, where you just had a guy come in and they sucked the oil out or the antifreeze, and you didn't even worry about where it went. They just left the shop and you were done. Well, today what they have is they have something that's called cradle-to-grave responsibility. And what that cradle-to-grave responsibility means is that if a licensed waste oil hauler, which you need to have a licensed waste oil hauler, you can't just get rid of it. You have to have a licensed hauler come in because you need his license number on the receipts that you have to keep in your possession at all times. And when he picks that oil up and he puts it in his truck and he drives away, you think your responsibility is finished and you don't have to worry about it anymore, when it really is not. When he puts that product into that truck, if he leaves your location, he goes to the 4, 5, 6 other locations down the road, and if he has a motor vehicle accident and that vehicle was to spill oil on the ground, everybody whose oil was picked up at that location that day is now on the hook and responsible for any kind of cleanup that is incurred. If his insurance doesn't cover it, then everybody who gave him that waste product is then on the hook for it as well. So that's something you have to think of as well too. Now, that's just to open the door and walk in. That's not counting the cost of the equipment that you need to purchase along the way. I'll give you for instance. When I opened up my shop did not have a heating system in it. It did not have running water in it. It did have it, but the pipes were broken because it was closed and they had frozen and broken. There was no lifts in my building, and there was no compressor in my building at all. So we had to put a compressor in the building, run all the piping around inside the shop, upgrade all the electrical inside the building, and we had to have lifts installed into the concrete. And now you think, well, you just put a lift into the concrete, it's no big deal. You screw a couple of holes in it. No, with lifts you need to have a minimum thickness of the concrete pad. And inside the shop, my particular shop, the concrete was only 3 inches thick. To put a lift on that concrete, you need to have 6 inches of concrete with rebar in it. So I needed to have the concrete removed where the lift was going and put in thicker concrete with rebar in it to be able to support the lift. Now, in my shop, I have 2 lifts inside the shop. I have 4 bays that I can work on, but I have 2 lifts. One of them is a half lift, which is not really a big deal. That lift just sits on top of the concrete and it's bolted in so it doesn't move around, and that 3 inches was adequate. But when you have a full-size lift, that's when you need to have the concrete thicker. And to put that lift in, to purchase the lift and have it installed and do all the concrete work, that was over 10 grand to have that done. The heating system, to put the heating system in, and this was quite a few years ago too, they had to put the heating system in. I think the heating system was around $8,000 to install the heating system and to do all of the gas work to bring the gas into the building, because the building at that time did not have a gas line coming into it. So we had to install a gas line as well. Now, my building, as you guys know by looking at my videos, my building has the regular garage doors that you pull down, but it also has security gates on the outside. When I bought the building, that's all it had was security gates on it. It did not have the doors, so we had to put 2 garage doors on and put in all the stuff that goes with the garage doors as well, which meant that we had to put insulated doors in, because if you have a very thin door in there, up in the Northeast, it gets pretty cold, so you'll wind up, with ice on the inside of the door. So we chose to go with an insulated door. So just off the bat, to walk into the building, that's all the stuff we had to do. And that's not counting the floor jacks, the diagnostic tools, all of the mechanical tools that you'll need to have. So in a synopsis of everything, what my thought is to open up a shop, if you had to open up a shop, and I'm talking about just renting a shop now, not purchasing the property or anything like that, if you had to just open up a shop from start to finish, buying all the tools and all the accessories and all of the odds and ends that you're going to need to do, you'll probably wind up paying anywhere between, and anybody in the business can correct me if they think I'm wrong, or we can talk about this in further depth, but just to get into a shop and have it adequately stocked with all of the stuff that you need and put everything up so you can easily do a repair, you're probably looking at least $150,000 to $200,000 just to open up the door and walk in. and get everything going. Now I'm talking about the insurance companies, because when you have insurance, you don't just make your monthly payments to your insurance company. They want a substantial deposit up front, to get you going. And which brings me to another point. The way a lot of shops get into trouble, and we'll go into more detail about this later on the next ride along. You know what? Maybe we won't even cover that now. We'll talk about this on the next ride along, because I don't want to bore you with a long ride along. The next video we'll talk about when you open up a shop. It's deciding what you're going to do when you're in that shop. Whether you're going to be a full service shop or you're going to specialize just in a specific field, and what you're going to do. I'm going to talk about my thoughts on that and what I evolved over the years. From when I first started, where I did everything from swinging engines to pulling transits to doing differentials. I did everything from start to finish. And over the years, how it changed in my shop and what I've done over the years to kind of like maximize what my shop can produce. But we'll talk about that on the next video. This video, we just talked about the cost of opening up a shop, and right off the bat, you're looking at probably a considerable amount of money. And with that, you need to have that income from day one to get your shop up and running, to produce an income just so you can pay for all of your expenses. To have a shop that's profitable, in my particular case, it's a 4-bay shop. You'll probably need to have a gross income I'm talking about now, of anywhere between $40,000 and $50,000 a month, just to pay the help and to sustain everything, and including paying yourself to make a living for yourself, so you can have a decent life and have the things that you need to have in your life. All right, so I think today we're going to call it quits. We're gonna change lanes first. We're going to cut it off right here, and anything that you guys want to talk about, let me know. I can talk about any kind of anything to do with the automotive industry. I've been through it. I've been doing this for such a long time. Let me know what you want to talk about and what your opinion is on this video, and what you think on the dollar figures that I told you, what it cost me per month to open up a shop and to run a shop. All right, and that's it. We're almost up to work, so I'm going to make a phone call. I got to call Mrs. Jimthecarguy and talk to her a little bit today before I get there, and that's it. All right, so as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.